Chapter 18. Blaze's head hung low as he trotted slowly into the outskirts of the king's camp on the plains of Uthal. Gillen swayed wearily in the saddle. He had barely slept in the past 3 days, snatching only brief rests once every 4 hours. 2 guards stepped forward to query his progress, and the young ranger fumbled inside his shirt for the silver amulet in the form of an oak leaf, the ranger's badge of office. At the sight of it, the guards stepped back hurriedly to clear the way. In times like these, nobody delayed a ranger, not if he knew what was good for him. Gillen rubbed his gritty eyes. "Where is the war council tent?" One of the guards pointed with his spear to a larger-than-normal tent, set up on a knoll overlooking the rest of the camp. There were more guards there, and a large number of people coming and going, as one would expect at the nerve centre of an army. "There, sir, on that small rise." Gillen nodded. He'd come so far, so fast, finishing the 4-day journey in just over 3 days. Now, these few hundred meters seemed like miles to him. He leaned forward and whispered in Blaze's ear. "Not much farther, my friend. One more effort, please." The exhausted horse's ears twitched, and his head came up a little. At Gillen's gentle urging, he managed to raise a slow trot, and they passed through the camp. Dust drifting on the breeze, the smell of wood smoke, noise and confusion. The camp was like any army camp anywhere in the world. Orders being shouted, the clang and rattle of arms being repaired or sharpened, laughter from tents, where men lay back, relaxing with no duties to be performed, until their sergeants found them and discovered jobs for them to be doing. Gillen smiled tiredly at the thought. Sergeants seemed to be totally averse to seeing their men having an easy time of it. Blaze came to a halt once more, and Gillen realized, with a jerk, that he'd actually nodded off in the saddle. Before him, 2 more guards barred the way to the War Council compound. He looked at them blearily. "King's Ranger," he croaked through a dry throat. "Message for the council." The guards hesitated. This dust-covered, half-asleep man, seated on a lathered, exhausted bay horse, might well be a ranger. He was certainly dressed like a ranger, as far as they could tell. Yet the guards knew most of the senior rangers by sight, and they had never seen this young man before, and he showed no sign of identification. What's more, they noticed, he carried a sword, which is definitely not a ranger's weapon, so they were reluctant to admit him to the carefully guarded War Council compound. Irritably, Gillen realized that he had neglected to leave the silver oak leaf device hanging outside his shirt. The effort of finding it again suddenly became intense. He fumbled blindly at his collar. Then a familiar and very welcome voice cut through his consciousness. "Gillen, what's happened? Are you all right?" That was the voice that had meant comfort and security to him throughout his 5 years as an apprentice. The voice of courage and capability and wisdom. The voice that knew exactly what action should be taken at any point in time. "Halt," he murmured, and realized that he was swaying, then falling from the saddle. Holt caught him before he hit the ground. He glared at the 2 sentries, who were standing by, not sure whether to help or not. "Give me a hand," he ordered, and they leapt forward, dropping their spears with a clatter to support the semi-conscious young ranger. "Let's get you somewhere to rest," Holt said. "You're all in." But Gillen summoned some of his last reserves of energy and, pushing clear of the soldiers, steadied himself on his own feet. "Important news," he said to Holt. "Must see the council. There's something bad going on in Celtica." Holt felt a cold hand of premonition clutch his heart. He cast his gaze around, looking back down the path where Gillen had come. Bad news from Celtica. And Gillen, apparently alone. "Where's Will?" he asked quickly. "Is he all right?" His heart lifted as Gillen nodded, a shadow of his normal grin showing through the bone weariness. "He's all right," Gillen told the grizzled ranger. "I came on ahead." As they had been talking, they had begun to move towards the central pavilion. There were more guards on duty here, but they moved out of the way at the sight of the senior ranger. He was a familiar figure around the war council. He put out a hand now to steady his former apprentice, and they entered the cool shade of the council pavilion. A group of 6 men were clustered around a sand map, a large table with the main features of the plains and mountains modelled in sand. They turned now at the sound of the new arrivals, and one of them hurried forward, concern written on his face. "Gillen!" he cried. He was a tall man, and his greying hair showed him to be in his late 50s. But he still moved with the speed and grace of an athlete, or a warrior. Gillen gave that tired smile again. "Morning, father," he said, for the tall grey-haired man was none other than Sir David, battlemaster of Caraway Fife and field commander of the King's army. The battlemaster looked quickly to Holt and caught the quick nod of reassurance there. Gillen was all right, he realised, just exhausted. Then his sense of duty caught up with his fatherly reaction. "Greet your king properly," he said softly, and Gillen looked up to the group of men, all their attention now focused on him. He recognised Crowley, the Ranger Corps commandant, and Baron Arald, and 2 senior barons of the realm, Thorn of Drayden and Fergus of Caraway. But the figure in the centre took his attention. A tall, blond man in his late 30s, with a short beard and piercing green eyes. He was broad-shouldered and muscular, because Duncan was not a king who let other men do all the fighting for him. He had trained with sword and lance since he was a boy, and he was regarded as one of the most capable knights in his own kingdom. Gillen attempted to sink to one knee. His joints screamed in protest and tried to lock up on him. The pressure of Holt's hand under his arm was all that stopped him falling once again. "My lord," he began apologetically, but Duncan had already stepped forward, seizing his hand to steady him. Gillen heard Holt's introduction. "Ranger Gillen, my lord, attached to Merrick Fife, with messages from Celtica." Suddenly, the king was galvanised with interest. "Celtica?" he repeated, studying Gillen more closely. "What's happening there?" The other council members had moved from the sand map to group around Gillen. Baron Arald spoke. "Gillen was carrying your messages to King Swidnid, my lord," he said, "invoking our mutual defence treaty and requesting that Swidnid send troops to join us." "They won't be coming," Gillen interrupted. He realised he had to tell the king his news before he collapsed from exhaustion. "Morgorath has them bottled up on the southwest peninsula." There was a stunned silence in the council tent. Finally, it was Gillen's father who broke it. "Morgorath?" he said incredulously. "How? How could he get any sort of army into Celtica?" Gillen shook his head, suppressing a huge need to yawn. "They sent small numbers down the cliffs until they had enough troops to catch the Celts by surprise. As you know, Swidned keeps only a small standing army." Baron Arald nodded, anger showing on his face. "I warned Swidned, my lord," he put in, "but those damned Celts have always been more interested in digging than protecting their own land." Duncan made a small, pacifying gesture with one hand. "No time now for recriminations, Arald," he said softly. "What's done is done, I'm afraid." "I should imagine Morgorath has been watching them for years, waiting for their greed to overcome their good sense," Baron Thorn said bitterly. The other men nodded quietly. Morgorath's ability to maintain a network of spies was all too well known to them. "So, Celtica has been defeated by Morgorath? Is this what you're telling us?" Duncan asked. This time, as Gillen shook his head, there were relieved glances around the tent. "The Celts are holding out in the southwest, my lord. They're not defeated yet. But the strange business of it all is that Wargle raiding parties have been carrying off the Celt miners." "What?" This time it was Crowley who interrupted. "What earthly use has Morgorath for miners?" Gillen shrugged in reply. "I've no idea, sir," he told his chief, "but I thought I'd better get here with the news of it as soon as possible." "You saw this happening then, Gillen?" Holt asked, frowning darkly as he puzzled over what the young ranger had just told him. Not exactly, Gillen admitted. We saw the empty mining towns and the deserted border posts. We were heading deeper into Celtica when we met a young girl who told us about the raids. A young girl? The king said. A Celt? No, my lord, she was Araluan, a lady's maid whose mistress was visiting Swidned's court. Unfortunately, they ran into a Wargle war party. Evenlyn was the only one to escape. Evenlyn, Duncan said, his voice the merest whisper. The others turned to him as he spoke. The king's face had turned a chalky white, and his eyes were wide with horror. That was her name, my lord, said Gillen, puzzled by the king's reaction. But Duncan wasn't listening. He had turned away and moved blindly to a canvas chair set by his small reading table. He dropped into the chair, his head sunk in his hands. The members of his war council moved towards him, alarmed at his reaction. My lord, Sir David of Carraway said, what is it? Duncan slowly raised his eyes to meet the battlemaster's. Evenlyn, he said, his voice breaking with emotion. Evenlyn was my daughter's maid.